This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
The voice of the UK.
Dotun Adebayo. Listen on BBC Sound.
Yeah, this is The Nightclub. I'm your night watchman, Dotun, and it's time to look at the headlines that you'll be waking up to this morning. I've been going through the front pages with freelance journalist Adam Clark.
It goes across many of the front pages, to be honest, Dotun. It's obviously the King's speech later today, the first under the new Labour government, and there's plenty of different, obviously, news lines going across the speech across the front pages of the papers. A lot around planning, a lot on transport, football governance. There's plenty to unpack, which I'm sure that the papers have done and will do over the next few days. So it should be an interesting speech from the King himself. Obviously, a lot for us journalists to unpack in what he said. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, there's a lot in it, which perhaps isn't surprising after 14 years of being governed by the other party. The one that caught my eye was this pledge to build 1.5 million new homes in the next few years. There has got lots of problems ahead, but which ones caught your eye?
There's quite a few, to be honest. Obviously, there is a slight change to the planning rules, as well as communities will be able to say how houses and infrastructure is built and not if, because obviously you look at local planning meetings across councils up and down the country, you always get objections to certain mass building of houses. So that would be interesting to see, should it be included, which is expected to be tomorrow, as to whether that sort of affects local councils and how local councils themselves will react to that. And obviously public transport is also sort of the one that stood out for me. The Better Buses Bill is what it's been described as on the front pages of a couple of the papers this morning. I think obviously you see a lot of northern regions and the metro mayors sort of looking at transport, certainly in Greater Manchester with Andy Burnham and Tracy Brabin in West Yorkshire. Both are pushing for better public transport in their respective areas, and very much copying the TfL model with Sadiq Khan in London.
Yeah, if this was a movie, The King's Speech, well, it would be about the King, wouldn't it? But it's not about the King. It's more about the Prime Minister and the new government and policy. How do you sell that in a newspaper? And it's not a bad question to ask. If you think about it, some of the newspapers have ignored it. I mean, some biggies have ignored it completely. I'm looking at the Daily Telegraph subjugates that to second lead, and one or two others. Which one was it that I was seeing earlier? The Guardian. Yeah, that was a surprise. They don't even mention it.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether they're looking to go off the back of it. Maybe. I think that the Mirror as well is a paper that's not led with it. Obviously, both of those papers have previous sort of relations with the Labour Party and have supported it. So I think that is an interesting move from both of those papers. And I think sort of looking at the wider story, whether we'll see it across the papers in days to come, when there's obviously more detail on the contents of the King's speech.
Yeah, and I don't even think it had that much competition. This is what really shocked me, particularly in The Guardian. You know, they've gone with turmoil for Labour in Wales after Gething resigns as First Minister as their leader, a couple of other stories on their front page. So it wasn't like it had a huge amount. You'd have thought, with all due respect to the former Welsh First Minister as he is now, the King's speech should really take precedence over that, shouldn't it?
I think so. And I think obviously each newspaper editor has their own decision on what is their lead. And I think obviously the story coming out of the Welsh Government today is obviously a big one for them. And I think obviously with the pressure that Vaughan Gething has been under, and obviously 4 of his ministers resigning, which obviously tipped it over the edge for him to resign is a big story in its own. But no, I think the King's Speech is very much the lead as it is in many of the other papers.
Yeah. So how do the other papers cover this story? They had their choice of which ones to focus on. I don't know if they differ that much, but how do they cover the story any differently?
I mean, a lot of them have led on the sort of the planning and the new housing regulations, and a lot of them have also touched on transport, because obviously housing and transport very much a big thing in people's lives. You got to have somewhere to live, and also a sustainable public transport system wherever that may be across the country. And I think that obviously from a government perspective, I think that's the important thing for Sir Keir Starmer is those two things in the King's Speech. And obviously there's other things like football governance and stuff to do with the Hillsborough law and Martin's law, off the back of the Manchester Arena bombing. So I think, as I said previously, there's a lot to unpack, and I think newspapers nationally and locally will sort of look at the detail from that speech tomorrow. This lunchtime, and they'll be able to look at that in more detail.
Yeah, transport and football governance are two of your specialist subjects. What have you been working on as part of the B network in Manchester on football governance?
So the B network is the new transport plan from the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. He's brought the buses back under public control the first time since the Thatcher government of '83, and I think that's obviously a big move for Greater Manchester. That the final phase of the buses coming back under public control starts next January, and I think that's been a big move. Obviously, the £2 singles. Andy Burnham from next year is looking to bring the daily and weekly ticket down and sort of sidestep into that on football governance. Obviously, locally in Manchester, an array of different football clubs have had their issues: Bury, Bolton, Rochdale. So again, those football clubs will be looking to see what a new football governance bill, and whether there'll be any changes in owners and directors test, which I know that the new Secretary of State for the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, Lisa Nandy's made a visit to Bury last week and talked about how she wants to change that sort of, or bring this bill in rather, and it make a difference to football fans at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we'll return to football in a moment. We can't avoid it really on a night like tonight, or on a morning like this morning. But was it wise, in your view, or unwise? And I'm looking at that Independent front page headline: Starmer's 35 new bills to, quote unquote, take back control of Britain. Well, we've heard that phrase before. Wise or unwise of the new Prime Minister to use the language of Brexit? Remember, take back control?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be the phrase. It's obviously, as you mentioned, it's on the Independent. I think it's been quoted in a couple of other front pages as well. I think you looking at obviously the current government and the previous government. Obviously, as you mentioned, there a phrase from Brexit. I think, I don't know. It's a bit of both. I think it's probably is wise, because obviously he does want to take back control, as you say. But I think he'll have looked at it and maybe thought it's a better idea, because at the end of the day, he wants to take back control after what his party has said is sort of the 14 years of Conservative chaos.
I suppose it's easier to take back control of anything when it's within your gift to take back control. Much more difficult when you've got to negotiate that control with some other body outside the UK, I guess. Only the Metro has gone for the resignation of Gareth Southgate as their lead story. In fact, that dominates their entire front page. There isn't any other story for them. It makes several of the other papers, but either as a second lead or as a smaller what we call a nib in the business, a little kind of small teaser on the front page to go and look further inside. Why is that? Why, Gareth, given all the noise around the England football team and specifically the manager over the last few days and the post-Euros final post-mortem as well, why only the Metro?
I don't know. It is very surprising, and credit to the Metro editor for sort of the comprehensive coverage. 'Cause I think it's a wrap around the back page as well. And I think, obviously, I think we talked about it last time I was on it about whether Southgate had a future with the England national team after this tournament, and obviously that's not the case. And I think with the way that the competition ended, I think Southgate was always going to step down after sort of such not a poor ending as such, but a negative end for his team. Watching the players come off the plane at Stansted earlier in the day, that obviously a very somber scene for them, and I think it is surprising how much it's not covered on the front pages. And I think if the other stories hadn't been in there, Trump or the King's speech, then it might have got more coverage. But it is very surprising that it doesn't cover more leads on the front page.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was the right decision by those who didn't lead with it, and particularly the tabloids as well, given how consumed we've been with the England team's journey in the Euros. And, judging by the last two nights of phone-ins here on the nightclub, that's what people wanted to talk about. They were talking about Gareth Southgate must resign yesterday and the night before that. And so I'm not sure if they have got the pulse of their readership and the nation right this morning, I've got to say. And having said that, though, the Metro's front page is a blinder, isn't it? I mean, if you agree with that, you tell me. But would you mind describing it? It's worth describing.
Yeah, it's a great sort of front page, and it has sort of Gareth Southgate with a sort of walking out a door as such, and then you sort of see a white strip across the front page, and it says "Dear Gareth," and then it opens with a letter sort of describing Southgate's time as England manager, because he's had a sort of quite a spell over the last 8 years, obviously taking over after the back of Roy Hodgson in Euro 2016, reaching the semi-final of the World Cup in 2018, the European Championships in 2021, and obviously the World Cup in Qatar, and then this Euros itself. But I think as sort of front pages go, Dotun, for this morning, I think in terms of a design and the way it looks, and if you're picking up a paper this morning based on design, I mean, you've got to give it to the Metro for the way they've laid it out, even with the sort of red, white, and blue in there.
Oh, yeah, of course it is red, white, and blue. I didn't even think about that. What got me was this, the headline, "Dear Gareth," going up on an angle, like you say, across this white strip that they've used. Because, of course, that's a riff, isn't it, of that "Dear England" speech that he did after the last Euros, when some of the England team were booed. Specifically, 3 of the black players got a lot of vitriol for missing penalties. And, he wrote this momentous speech for not just football lovers, not just the Three Lions, but for the nation, which has been turned into a play since then, and no doubt will be turned into a movie at some point. So the spin is "Dear Gareth," and then it's our love letter, or the Metro's love letter, to Gareth Southgate, rather than it being his uplifting statement to the nation. And I love the way they've composed it. Theirs is not as brilliant as Dear England, by the way, but it's Dear Gareth, so it's over. You're leaving us. And although it might not always seem like it, we really are thankful for everything you've done, etc., etc. You've put the pride, do you get it? Back into the Three Lions, etc., etc. I thought very creative, and I suspect that if you're an England fan, of which we are very many, that this is the one paper of all the papers that you'd pick up. It makes the others' coverage of Southgate's resignation. I think it makes their front pages look a little bit, Championship rather than Premier League.
Yeah, it's as we say, it's an interesting decision from the papers. That the Mirror have sort of got a top third of Gareth Southgate, describing him as man of honour. As obviously after he quits after giving it his all, as is quoted on the front of the Mirror. So I think the Mirror probably goes second to the Metro on that, and then apart from that, as you say, it's in terms of coverage of that story, it's not too good from an editorial perspective as where it places on any of the front pages. The Independent have sort of got a strip of it at the top as well. Sort of they say England do need a new chapter, and where England's next chapter comes from will have to be seen. I think Eddie Howe's currently the favourite, and then you're sort of looking at Graham Potter as well, and I think the Star have put themselves behind the former Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah, and he's in the running for it. It seems almost incredible to believe, too much to believe, maybe. Well, we'll see how that all unfolds. I'm so pleased that for your third story this morning, you've chosen the one of the stories that caught my eye. It's one of the shorts on the front page of the Telegraph, is it? Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
It may have gone unnoticed, but arguably it has unforetold consequences for this country, the health of this country, and specifically the health of our children.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of the Telegraph always do seem to have those sort of good, interesting stories that catch your eye at the bottom of their front page. And I think, as you said there, it's quite a shocking one. The headline reading, Child's Diet, Mostly Ultra-Processed Foods. And it talks about how children that have been studied from research at Cambridge University, that 2/3 of their daily calories are coming from ultra processed foods. And I think it's something that maybe the new Labour government will be looking into. Whether it gets a mention in the King's speech later, we'll have to see about sort of health and nutrition for children. Obviously, it's been discussed over many years as to what should happen and where sort of advertising for these types of foods come from, whether that be sort of fast food restaurants or whether that's sort of sold in pre-packaged meals in supermarkets. It's certainly an interesting story as to where it goes next, but I think the statistics tell you it, Dotun, it's quite a concern on the front of the Telegraph.
Oh, it is a concern. They had studied more than 3,000 British children aged between 11 and 18 and found that the majority of their eating came from ultra-processed foods. Yeah, I don't know what to say about this. For me, it's quite shocking. But then again, you think, and remember, ultra-processed food has been linked to all sorts of health risks, including cancer, heart disease and obesity. Obesity, well, you could say that again. If you eat ultra-processed 2/3 of the time, well, what did you expect is my question. Although not many of us understand the dangers of ultra-processed foods, because, we eat it, lots of people eat it, maybe not as much as youngsters between 11 and 18 who, let's face it, love their chicken and chips. And I would argue that the chicken and chips is ultra-processed, particularly at 99p. You get change for £1 from it. But The how can anybody stop it? How can the and it's easy to do the studies, but it's like you're not telling certainly me anything new about the studies apart from it's worse than even I thought. But the question is, how do you stop kids? And they don't address this on the front page of the Telegraph. They might, give you a bit more information on page 2. It refers you to page 2 because it knows this is a story that you're going to want to read more of, particularly if you've got children of a certain age, 11 to 18, etc. But how do you stop it? You can control kids' diets to a certain extent, but when they get to the secondary school, I think all options go out the window because the kids decide what they want to eat themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an interesting one. And I think obviously, I guess there is more detail sort of inside page 2 of the Telegraph this morning. I think obviously looking at that, as we said, that the statistics are alarming, but I think it then, as you said, comes back to what happens next and what the sort of health professionals or the new government look at in terms of how they reduce this, because I think it's an alarm to them. It'll be an alarm to parents and grandparents that pick up the Telegraph this morning. I think something needs to be done in terms of trying to be able to bring these figures down, because I think, as we've both said, it's an alarming thing to sort of see on the front pages of the papers. And I think, as you said there, it's sort of the researchers has previously linked these type of diets to an added risk of obesity, heart disease, and cancer as well, which obviously people won't want to develop. So I think it's one for the new government maybe to look on, and whether there's something that they're able to do to be able to help it. But it's all right saying there's something to be able to do, but I guess for them it's not an easy choice into how they do that.
Adam Clark there with the headlines that you'll be waking up to this morning.